Awesome. Good morning, everyone. I'm Dr. Cynthia Sutherland, the program lead for emerging industries here at AWS Security Assurance. That's still good? Okay, awesome. Today, we're going to provide you guys lessons learned and insights into compliance requirements as your business expands. So, this month marks my 1 year anniversary of being here at AWS, and it has been an exciting year. Prior to coming here, I served as the Chief Information Security Officer for FEMA, where I led the integration of cybersecurity into America's emergency management systems. And prior to that, I served as the Chief Information Security Officer for the Joint Chief of Staff, where I led the integration of cybersecurity into our military weapons systems. And after 25 years of public service, I'm now here at AWS helping our customers and our emerging industries integrate cybersecurity into their systems. Joining me today will be my AWS colleagues, Ray Zaman and Kaushik Mohanty, and they'll do their introductions when they come up. So let's jump right in. So today we begin our presentation with a couple of basic considerations that are often overlooked but have a major impact to your compliance program as your business expands. Next, we'll provide insights and lessons learned into your compliance requirements and implications when expanding using new services. And we're going to use the automobile industry as an example. And then we're going to look at compliance implications when expanding to new geolocations, such as the European Union, and we're going to use GDPR as an example. Then we'll show you how to ease your compliance and audit requirements using AWS Control Tower. And finally, we'll show you how to meet your data residency requirements using AWS's Global Compliance Program, as well as AWS Control Tower. And hopefully you guys can walk away with some next steps to help improve your compliance program as your business expands. So we start our presentation off with highlighting the ultimate driver for your employees and your operations, your mission statement. Businesses are on a mission to provide services and products to consumers in different locations. Here are a couple of mission statements. When you look at these mission statements, these businesses provide services to the world. And servicing the world means that you have to comply with the data requirements to protect the data across the world. So here's what I want you guys to do. I want you to take out your phone or your notepad, and as you listen to our presentation, I want you to think about how you can improve your compliance program. I want you to think about your organization and your mission statement. I want you to think about your customers and the locations that you serve, and then think about the new services that your business will be offering, and then the new locations that your business may be expanding to. And then as you hear these concepts and tips, write them down as your next steps to help improve your compliance program. We start with basic considerations that serves as the foundation for your compliance program for your business. These considerations are the most overlooked items in cybersecurity. The more they expand, the more your responsibilities to protect your data expands. And most companies throw people and technology at it without really taking the time to step back and think about why they're even throwing the people and technology at these items in the first place. The first consideration is data type. Data type dictates your business's cyber compliance requirements. A lot of us know this, but many forget to take the time out to actually step back and look at their data types as a business expands. For example, if your business is expanding into a new state that defines healthcare data differently than your originating state, that's now new compliance requirements. What about when your business expands to a new country that defines personal data differently than your originating country? As cyber professionals, we focus on multiple data types, but these are just an example of data types that you have to take a look at. But why? Why does your business have to comply with these different requirements? Well, because of your location. Geolocation, or the physical location of your data, dictates jurisdiction. And bottom line, in security, jurisdiction dictates who writes and who enforces which regulations and which standards that your business must comply with. Throughout my cyber career, the one thing that I always followed was the data, whether it was personal data about American soldiers in Stuttgart, Germany, acquisition data on a foreign partner system, or personal data about, or I'm sorry, missile data from a system in Spain traveling to the United States and then to another country. And I followed the creation, the transmission, and storage of this data because you can't protect what you can't see, right? So you have to make sure you understand where the data is coming from. Now, when I became the CISO for the joint staff, as a federal CISO, I had to understand the compliance requirements from the federal perspective, from a federal law. And in America, the federal law is the United States Code. I had to know United States Code Title 5 for privacy data, Title 10 for military data, Title 18 for criminal data, Title 40 and 44 for data about federal systems. Then, when I became CISO for FEMA, not only did I have to know those federal laws and comply with them, but I also had to understand the the state requirements for the 50 states that we had to work with to execute our mission. And then on top of that, I also had to understand the policies, procedures, and culture of 574 Indian and tribal nations. That's over 600 different compliance requirements that I had to know as a cyber professional. So I want you to take some time out to think about what are your requirements as your business expands. When you look at, when you take a step back while you're here at Reinforce and ask yourself, what are our new services? What new locations will we be expanding to? And think about now what compliance requirements you'll have to comply with. When you review your answers, I want you to think about the two examples that we're going to provide. The first example we're going to use will be new services such as shown in the automotive industry, and another using expanding to new locations using European countries as an example. Now, currently, the automotive industry, automotive customers want to do more within the automobile industry. They are comparing their automobiles to their smartphones. They want to use more apps, more streaming services, and they expect updates to these streaming services and the apps in their vehicles. So when you hear automotive CEOs talk about the digital transformation of the automobile industry, they're often referring to the expansion of the industry using new mobility services and solutions. This digital transformation requires more data, and in some instances, new data types. The problem is that most automotive companies have siloed their data across business functions, and this keeps them from moving forward with their digital transformation. Now, for example, when you look here and you look at the different business functions, some of the examples we see is where supply chain data is being kept from the sales and marketing teams, and this impacts their ability to meet their deadlines. And then in some instances, we have sales and marketing data that is separate from the design team that's in charge for creating a better driver experience. And so for most companies, this organizational silos is also reflected in how they store their data across their enterprise. But with AWS's broadest and deepest set of services for data warehousing, analytics, and machine learning, we offer our customers the ability to break through these silos, connect their data to create enterprise-wide data lakes. And then they use this data to realize improvements across their value chain. And they're now able to collaborate more with their suppliers, their dealers, and their customers. This gives them a 360-degree view of the data as well as the life cycle of their vehicles. And the combination of these efforts allows them to expand the customer access to transportation, increase safety and improve traffic congestion, as well as expand the driver and passengers' conveniences within the vehicle. This expansion within the automotive industry is why we expect more changes in the automotive industry in the next 5 years than we've ever seen in the last 50. Automotive customers choose AWS because we provide the expertise, the capabilities, and the innovation that allows them to digitize more data, automate more processes, and share this data between suppliers, partners, customers at a faster, easier, and lower cost to them. This is great news for the automotive industry. As an automotive CEO, with the ability to discover, unlock, and share this data, they see this data as an asset to develop actionable insights and new products to help address their customers' needs. But as a cybersecurity professional, what do you see? I see new data types from infotainment systems being stored on vehicles. I see critical infrastructure data from charging stations via the electric vehicles. And I see sharing of personal data between the driver and the automobile dealership and the manufacturer and potentially other vendors. These new data types means new regulations and new compliance requirements for this expanding industry. For example, the Video Privacy Protection Act. It regulates the disclosure of data about a consumer's conception of video content. What does this mean now for an automobile manufacturer who wants to expand their services and include video streaming in their new vehicle? Who is now responsible for the security controls to protect the exchange of the driver's digital content, but and viewing history from other passengers in the car and other apps that may be on the vehicle? This expansion requires a review of the existing data types, the new data types, as well as the existing and new regulations influencing the expansion of the automobile industry. For over 14 years, AWS has been the world's most comprehensive and broadly adopted cloud platform. And despite our innovation, our relentless innovation efforts in the name of our customers, we continue to focus on privacy and security for our customers' data by providing them services that offer full ownership and privacy to meet their data residency requirements. We continue to offer them a protected infrastructure designed for the world's most risk-sensitive organizations. And then we also provide an environment that's compliant with various regulatory and industry standards. So, to build and maintain trust with our customers, AWS satisfies compliance requirements for virtually every regulatory agency across the world. We also regularly achieve third-party validations for thousands of compliance requirements, while also continually monitoring our compliance status to ensure that our customers meet their compliance requirements for industries like the finance, retail, healthcare, the government, and beyond. Currently, our standards and compliance certifications include PCI DSS, HIPAA HITRUST, FedRAMP, ISO 27001, and TSAX. And with AWS's global compliance programs, you strengthen your own compliance program by inheriting security controls that we operate and maintain. And then you also receive access to security tools that allows you to configure it based on your mission statement, your services, the data types that you are responsible for, and the geolocations that your business expands to. Now, we looked at our global compliance program, and we looked at the impact, the implications of expanding with new services. Next, we're going to take a deep dive into GDPR and what it looks like when expanding into new geolocations such as Europe. Thank you, guys.
Good morning. My name is Ray Zaman. I'm a solutions architect with AWS, and I work in the New York metro area, mainly with independent software vendors. And one of the common misconceptions that I run across with my customers is that GDPR is just another compliance framework. But GDPR is a law, and where something like your QSA might evaluate your PCI DSS compliance, or your auditors might evaluate your SOC compliance. The ultimate arbiter for GDPR compliance would be a judge. So for this reason, you want to talk to your counsel about GDPR compliance. And there's a good talk about that from Tim Raines. He's our former head of compliance public sector in Europe. As I go through these, there's going to be a number of QR codes and links, so you might want to keep your cameras out, snap some pics of these for further reference in the future. So it's important to talk to your counsel because it's a law, but also because of the changing legal landscape. So GDPR was adopted in 2016 to go into effect in 2018, and the European Commission deemed that the U.S. Department of Commerce Privacy Shield was adequate for data transfers at that time. Cloud Act was passed in 2018. That created a mechanism for U.S. law enforcement to obtain data from organizations in Europe. 2020 came the Schrems II judgment by the Court of Justice of the European Union that invalidated the Privacy Shield agreement. There's an interesting court case in January of this year where a district court in Munich ruled against a website operator. And this website operator was using Google fonts. And in the course of rendering the web page, the IP address of the site visitor was exposed to Google. And in this case, the court ruled that that IP address was personal information and it was improperly exposed to Google. In March of this year, the Biden administration announced the intent to create a transatlantic privacy framework. But sometimes different branches of our government work at cross purposes. And also in the same month, there was the FBI v. Visaga Supreme Court judgment, which made it more difficult for individuals to challenge government collection of personal information. And then just last month, there was a case in Italy where a privacy regulator ruled against a website operator just for using Google Analytics. So you can see with this changing legal landscape, it's important to talk to counsel, talk to your lawyers, make sure that you understand the changes to the law as they come along to comply with GDPR. So I'm going to talk a little bit about GDPR itself. All right, when you talk about GDPR, there's some terms that are defined in the law. There's personal data. That's data attributed to a natural person. There's a data controller that determines the purpose and means of processing the data. There's the data processor that processes the data on behalf of the controller. And then there's this concept of data transfer, which I mentioned on the previous slide. You're transferring data out of Europe to another country. In this case, customers I talk to are working in the United States. And then under GDPR, there's some roles as well. There's the data subject, about whom you'll be collecting the personal data. And then there's the data controller and the data processor. And these roles can be a little confusing because AWS is a data processor. We have actually documentation, a data processing addendum. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. And most of our customers are data controllers, and they, as data controllers and data processors, have obligations under GDPR. But sometimes our customers are data processors, in which case you might be collecting, for example, you might be collecting and processing logs on behalf of another data controller. So you might, depending on the workload, depending on the application, you might fall into the data controller role or the data processor role. It's important to understand what your obligations are under both of those. Top 5 concerns I hear from my customers. Lawfulness of processing. So this is something a little different that you might not be accustomed to in the United States. Under GDPR, you have to meet all the 6 conditions under Article 6 to be lawfully processing data. And then you may have heard of the right to be forgotten. Data subjects have the right to be forgotten. They also have the right to data portability. So this all leads into data protection by design and default. It's very helpful to start with these things in mind from the beginning, because it's difficult to bolt these things on after you've already got a built workload or an application or something. It's difficult to add the right to be forgotten. But if you start with all this from default and by design, it makes it much easier to comply down the road. And then, of course, there's the notification of a breach. That's important to understand as well. That if there is a breach, there are reporting requirements, and the fines can be steep if you're not compliant with any of these. So those are some of the challenges. Again, it's not a technical framework, but there are technical measures that are required under GDPR. We're going to talk a little bit more about those in a bit. But those technical measures are going to be very specific to what your application does and what your workload does. It's not something it's not an assessment AWS can make. We can't say, here's the controls that you need. You have to take a look at the data you're collecting, why you're collecting it, the context of the collection of that data, and then that is going to help inform you as to how to be compliant with GDPR. So you may have seen this. This is in a lot of our documentation. This is the shared responsibility model. And AWS, we say we're responsible for security and compliance of the cloud, and we provide tools to you, our customers, to build workloads that are security and compliant in the cloud. So we're responsible for security and compliance of our data centers, of the tools that we make available to you. We demonstrate that compliance through our artifacts, our audit reports that we make available. And we provide a host of tools for you to use to build compliant workloads in the cloud. The challenge with GDPR is that it's not always so cut and dry where that line is. So a data controller, as we mentioned before, has responsibilities, and those would be managing consent of the subject, managing portability. Okay, AWS, we have obligations as well, and we spell them out in our documents, in the data processing addendum and the supplement, and our standard contractual clauses. But there might be cases where it's kind of unclear as to who's responsible, right? So AWS is a data processor, but we might also be a data controller, because when you open up an AWS account, you'll be providing us with certain information that we're responsible for curating and making sure that we maintain that information in a compliant manner. So these are things to understand. It's very dependent on the specific data you're collecting and the context around it. So it's good to talk to your attorney, but we have some tools that can help you as well. So another thing I hear about is, does AWS access our data? So these are a couple of clauses that are spelled out right in our data processing addendum. I encourage you to take a look at it. I'm going to provide a link to it later on in one of the later slides. But we will not access or use or disclose your data except. So understand the exception. Okay, we will not transfer your data to another region except. So the exception might be that you initiate an API call to transfer that data. So it's important to understand these differences and understand these clauses when you're trying to comply with GDPR, and when you're thinking about moving into the European Union, and you want to start doing business there. You need to think these things through. Now, I mentioned we have a lot of tools that can help you. I'm not going to list them all here. There's a lot listed here, but one of the very useful and very interesting and helpful tools is AWS Control Tower. And to talk a little bit more about AWS Control Tower is my colleague Kaushik.
Thank you, Ray. Can you guys hear me well? Okay, thanks. So since he's already mentioned about Control Tower, let me ask you guys, by show of hands, how many of you have either implemented Control Tower or decided not to implement after doing your due diligence? It's quite a few. Okay, thank you. So let me set the context here. Global expansion, Control Tower, maybe there is a little bit of connection that you would like to make there. Most of the time, customers, when they embark on a global expansion strategy, they have two things going on. Globalization of their systems and applications, and then localization as well, because there would be initiatives specific to a country or a region. For the localization aspect, you could potentially look at a greenfield implementation of AWS. For the globalization aspect, you would be looking at extensibility of your AWS environment. And then there is this notion of localization. And you could have a blend for those initiatives. Regardless of whether you are implementing AWS in a greenfield setup or extending your existing AWS environment, AWS's recommendation is to start with a multi-account strategy using Control Tower. So if you were to start on a multi-account strategy using Control Tower, the first question that comes across is why multi-account? Why not single account? And a lot of customers today have a large footprint of AWS in a single account environment and are deliberating on whether they should be going the multi-account way or not. But the challenges you have with single account is in terms of managing the service limits, because every service, AWS service, has a certain limit, because we want to make sure that we are not over configuring a service that may be a drain on resources and may not be necessarily needed by the customer. And we obviously want to be customer obsessed in that sense. So those service limits become a limitation in terms of how much you can scale in a single account. Then the permissions, be it the administrator, a user as well as a power user. If you have multiple applications and multiple lines of businesses all in the same account, it can cause a lot of difficulty in terms of how you manage permissions. Then comes blast radius. Now that's one thing where you don't want your entire enterprise to get impacted, because everything is running in a single account. And you want to make sure that those bad actors are not able to do stuff like Bitcoin mining to drain your resources, leading to cost overruns, and most of all, causing breach in security. So what you need to do there is limit the blast radius to potentially an account or two if there is one that happens. And that's what you can mitigate that risk by going for a multi-account strategy. And of course, the governance and the whole notion of compliance gets better addressed with a multi-account strategy. Now, why Control Tower? Control Tower is a managed service. So folks, you've already deployed those. So we manage your implementation. And we also offer those landing zone upgrades and updates that you might have come across with newer features that keep getting rolled out to our customer. It also encapsulates all the best practices, all the best practice blueprints and guardrails, and make them available to our customers through what we call a landing zone. And that's the one that keeps getting updated and refreshed as we go along. Control Tower also automates your account provisioning process. It implements all the guardrails, be it preventive or detective, and all the best practices from an account provisioning standpoint and give you that scale and speed in terms of um, you know expanding to your regions globally as you scale. And it also makes all the resources, accounts, organization units, all of those offering a compliance status in a dashboard. So now, talking about what it does, essentially it sets up an AWS landing zone, as I was talking about. This involves setting up several services like organization units, the foundational accounts that define whether how you would be handling the logging and security mapping across accounts. It centralizes identity and access. It establishes guardrails, and I'll talk a little more on this part because this would be the segue to data residency and how you would implement data residency and GDPR compliance using Control Tower. And then, of course, the automated compliant automated account provisioning with compliance and standardization. And it's not just a day one setup; it's something that we are talking about managing on a continuous basis. If you double click on what's there under the hood of Control Tower, there are about 12 AWS services that Control Tower orchestrates and sort of obfuscates in terms of what these do from a management and governance standpoint. So you have Control Tower. If you were to initialize in a greenfield account, it is going to set up its own AWS organizations. That's the first thing it does. And the account is a management account, and there is a one-to-one relationship between a Control Tower implementation and a management account associated with it. If you were to implement Control Tower in an existing account, it'll use the AWS organizations that exists in that account. But what it does, once you initialize Control Tower, to build that landing zone, it'll spin up a single sign-on for centralized identity and federated access. It'll also set up 2 foundational accounts, rolling up to 2 OUs, one being a security OU, which is one that just has these 2 foundational accounts. And you now have the ability to bring your own account in case you want to bring in your log archive account, you want to bring in your security audit account, you have the ability to bring it in, which, by the way, if you would like to use what Control Tower spins up, obviously you have the option to do that. And these accounts essentially deal with making sure that all the best practice blueprints are used from an account baselining standpoint, from a security cross-account mapping standpoint, and also keeping logs in an S3 bucket, logs that come through CloudTrail as well as AWS config. Service catalog is also something that gets set up as Control Tower is initialized, and Service Catalog creates the account factory, which spins all the other accounts under the governance of Control Tower. These are accounts where you would put your workloads and have these accounts assigned to different OUs based on how you would like to divvy up your usage of AWS services between application teams and lines of businesses. Getting to guardrails, because this is going to be a segue slide to the use case of data residency, some of what was covered in Cynthia's presentation. So you have either mandated guardrails or strongly recommended guardrails. Those are, and that set of guardrails keeps growing. And we want to make sure that the strongly recommended guardrails are the ones customers evaluate and decide whether to implement or not. We are also having a mechanism of having a dual guardrail strategy to make sure that if there is a preventive guardrail, if there is a detective guardrail, there is a preventive guardrail associated with it. The preventive guardrails essentially are always compliant, and they are set up using service control policies, which you get as part of your AWS organization implementation. These obviously offer granular AWS policies and ensure that you are enforcing those as you set up these accounts. So they will always show in your dashboard as always compliant. On the other hand, detective guardrails, which are set up using config rules, may either show compliant or non-compliant, and it will be left to you in terms of what you want to do from a remediation standpoint. These guardrails can be applied at an account level, they could be applied at an OU level, and they cascade down to all the accounts underneath the OU. So moving on to the use case that I was talking about that uses these guardrails extensively. Data residency essentially involves keeping and storing and processing data in a specific location. In AWS world, it would basically be one or more regions. And data essentially means anything, video, audio, text. It's not just the data that sits in your databases that we are talking about here. And who gets impacted? Regulated industry sector, public sector, you have global or multinational companies that get impacted. And you also have companies that are driven and organizations that are driven by regulatory requirements, contractual requirements as well, which essentially means that a company working with contractors, I mean, not vendors, as well as with other customers, may need to comply with data residency requirements and keep the data in specific geographic locations. And also corporate policies. Now, corporate policy could be a company that wants to take advantage of a more favorable tax regime. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with that. Would need to do a certain amount of business in that country where it is headquartered. So those kinds of guidelines also dictate data residency posture of organizations. And it's part of a modern data strategy. That's something that most organizations want to move along with to make sure that they can manage their data more effectively and comply with legal requirements down the line. 3 key challenges that one faces when it gets to data residency, to setting up data residency. First of all, is many organizations find data residency as a very difficult way to move ahead with their projects, and they end up resorting to suboptimal processes that they've been using before anything was made available to them. So what happens with that is they end up using more cumbersome processes, make it even more complex, and develop a little bit of a resistance to adoption of AWS. And more importantly, hurting their own cloud journey. Data residency is not just complex to interpret, it is very, very hard to implement. Think about all the services that get impacted and what needs to be done in terms of configuration changes to make sure that those services are compliant. It can be an arduous process. Not only that, keeping that compliance for all the services that you have on an ongoing basis, or the manageability of that can become very different. It's very difficult. So if you're using some of these services, we want to make it easy for you. And most customers use more than 20, 25 services. Now, trying to do that for every service and continuing to keep it, sort of compliant or evergreen from a data residency standpoint can be very complex. So what I'll do now is turn it over to Ray, who's going to talk about both GDPR as well as data residency compliance requirements and do a short demo for you guys. And we'll go from there. Thank you.
Thank you, Kashi.
Sure.
So yeah, this all ties back to GDPR actually in an interesting way. So GDPR does require technical and organizational measures to be implemented once you decide what your controls are, and those technical measures cover data access controls, monitoring, logging, encryption. And the nice thing about Control Tower is that it comes with guardrails to help you implement those controls. So you can deny access to services in certain regions, disallow changes to IAM roles, You can disallow cross-region data transfer, enable CloudTrail, enable encryption. There's a growing list of guardrails that are available. You can check out the link below the slide. And the nice thing about Control Tower is it makes it easy to implement these guardrails. So I've got a quick 5-minute demo here I'm going to go through, which just to demonstrate how it would work. So what we've got here is we've got our AWS console. We've got the Control Tower dashboard. We've already have an organization set up. And what we want to do is we want to implement some guardrails to, in this case, we'll start with a preventive guardrail to prevent the use of regions outside the specific regions that we're managing. So we'll just do a search for a data residency guardrail, get a list here. We'll go and select the one we want. Okay, we're going to deny access based on the regions. Okay, so we're going to deny access to regions outside those specific regions that we've selected to use. So we go in here, we see it's not enabled. So we're going to go to our landing zone settings. Okay, scroll. We can see here it's not enabled in the on the right hand side. You'll see the region deny guardrail is not enabled. So the next thing is to modify the settings. Okay, we'll scroll down to the region deny setting, and we're just going to enable it. Okay, hit update, and when we update, it's going to show us the regions that we're allowed to use. These are the regions that are currently governed. So if we attempt to utilize resources in any other regions, it'll prevent us from doing so. So we just hit update the landing zone. Let it go ahead and do the update. Okay, and we'll go check out our landing zone settings. We'll see on the right-hand side now that it's enabled. So let's log into one of these accounts now that's subject to these guardrails. We're just going to log into one. All right, you'll see once we're logged in, the region in the upper right corner is Northern California. That's one of the regions that is being prevented from being used. So if we go to the EC2 console and try to manage some EC2 resources in that region, we should get some errors. Okay, there you'll see the API errors right there. If we switch to one of the regions that's permitted, like Northern Virginia, there you go. We can manage those resources, create and manage, do what we need to do in that particular region. So that's a preventive control. Let's do a detective control. So we'll go back to our guardrails. And let's say we want to just detect if anyone has any public S3 buckets, right? So we go back to our data residency, scroll down to find the desired guardrail. Okay. We're going to just select the guardrail we want. And in this case, once we select it, we'll pick a particular OU that we want to apply it to. In this case, we'll just apply it to our core OU. And just hit enable, and that's how simple it is. So that's how Control Tower makes it easy to implement these guardrails and these controls once you've decided what controls you need. So things to think about for next steps after this talk today. You might want to take a look at our Cloud Audit Academy. And again, these are next few slides are going to have QR codes and links so you can snap some pics here. One thing you might want to think about is your data strategy, because you remember GDPR requires that, has that requirement lawfulness. You have to have a lawful reason for collecting data. So you might want to think about, are you collecting data you really don't need? Do you have a justification for it? And then talk to your account team and schedule a Control Tower activation day. Your account team can help you with that. And we have SAs and specialists that can then help you implement the guardrails as well. And then we have lots of additional resources for compliance. So you can talk to our security assurance services. They can help you with your compliance needs for a broad range of frameworks. And then we have quick start guides, and we have services, and then we have a lot of online resources for GDPR and EU data protection and that sort of thing. So if you want to continue research in that subject, you could take a look at some of these links. They all have useful information. So with that, on behalf of myself, Dr. Sutherland, and Kaushik, thanks all for coming out and hearing us today. I hope you enjoy your rest of the time here at Inforce, and please remember to complete the session survey. Thanks all.